Did you know that only about 5% of indie games ever make a profit? Those are not good odds. So how do hooks help? Welcome to the second video in our series on video game hooks. What they are, how they help, and how to create them. If you haven't seen the first video, please go watch it before continuing this one. Now we're going to talk about how to apply our definition of hooks to your games, and how to generate hooky game ideas in this edition of Clark Tank Deep Dive. Hooks aren't the only thing you need in order to improve your chances of success. You also want a viable genre. But hooks can be used to help you get a sense for how likely it is that a game in a given genre will succeed. How you identify which genres are viable is something we'll cover in another deep dive video. But in general, you can pay attention to each platform's top sellers charts to get a rough sense for which genres are viable and how they are trending. And that's exactly what we do on our Clark Tank live streams. Now, if your game idea's genre is very viable, then your hooks don't need to be as strong. You don't need as big of a slice of that audience in order to be profitable. But what if your game idea is in a genre that is less viable? Maybe you looked at the best sellers in the genre and even they were barely in the profitable range. Or maybe fans of that genre just play the same game forever without switching, so they may be less likely to try yours. If that's the case, then you need a very powerful hook to give you the best possible chance of capturing a large share of that audience. An example of a strong genre is the Factorio-like genre. It seems that Factorio-like games don't need much of a unique hook to be successful in the current market. It is currently a very large and very viable genre. Some games in this genre are succeeding despite having lower review scores than Factorio and having fewer discernible hooks. An example from the opposite end of the spectrum is the puzzle game Baba Is You. Puzzle games are a rather weak genre, but Baba Is You has a super strong hook which allowed it to capture a large slice of that target audience and even to expand that market by bringing in new players. But don't make the mistake of thinking that the more hooks you have, the better your game will sell. You also need solid anchors. An anchor is something familiar about the genre, and you need anchors as well as hooks if your game is going to sell well. If you look at how people browse Steam, you'll see that they are initially looking for hints as to what genre your game is. Click on the link in the description below to see Chris Zukowski's pioneering work in this area. If your game is missing critical anchors, then people won't be able to tell if this is their kind of game. That is why I resisted various calls to make Crypta the Necrodancer more silly. My instincts told me to keep it as roguelike as possible. I knew that the rhythm-based gameplay would make the game seem quite strange to traditional roguelike fans, so I wanted to include as many familiar roguelike anchors as I could to ensure that roguelike fans would still feel at home. You want your game to contain many desirable things: great graphics, audio, game feel, etc., as well as most of the expected genre tropes, but probably only a few really surprising hooky elements. And not every game needs a hook to succeed. There are plenty of examples of non-hooky games that have been huge successes. Hooks just help us to improve our chances of succeeding in a crowded marketplace. For example, what's the hook of Stardew Valley? I'm not saying that it's not a good game. It certainly is an excellent one. But it's not a hook that made it sell well. It's the gameplay itself being great and the fact that there was a pent-up demand for that sort of game on PC platforms. Stardew Valley took a genre that was viable on Nintendo platforms and brought it to a new platform, the PC. But doing this is risky, since there was no data to suggest that the same audience existed on PC. It may have been a Nintendo-only phenomenon. Whereas if you analyze which genres are viable and then come up with hooky game concepts that serve those genres, you have lots of data to study from other games that succeeded or failed. This will help you to get a sense for your likelihood of success. But how do you generate hooky game ideas? I'm aware of 3 ways. The first is to hope that lightning strikes and that the idea just comes to you. And sometimes that does happen. But if such ideas don't just come to you, then what are your options? The second way is a mashup. Mashups are often hooky because the combination of 2 existing genres is surprising, as long as that combination hasn't been explored before, and it will automatically be desirable to the Venn diagram overlap of the audiences of those 2 genres. However, if you just force a mashup where there isn't any gameplay synergy, the game may not be fun, and people will feel that it was forced and not natural. So instead, I suggest that you generate mashups by taking a look at an existing genre, identifying a flaw or weakness in that genre, and then using a mechanic or lesson from another genre to fix that flaw. Not only does this help you to improve the genre, but it also results in a mashup of two genres. This is what I did with Crypt of the Necrodancer. I loved the original game Rogue, but I felt that it was too unfair. It felt like most seeds were simply unwinnable. But in contrast, when I played the game Spelunky, I felt that every seed was winnable, and that all deaths were my own fault, not the game's. I wanted to have that same feeling of fairness, but in a game more similar to Rogue. I identified that this feeling of fairness was coming from the real-time nature of Spelunky, so I wondered how I could make Rogue more real-time. I didn't want to completely remove the turn-based nature of the roguelike genre, so instead I opted to make the game skill-based by requiring fast turns. And when I prototyped a roguelike game where you had to move at least once every second, it kind of felt like I was moving to a rhythm. So I tried playing the game to the beat of Michael Jackson's Thriller, and Crypt of the Necrodancer was born. I had made a compelling new twist on the roguelike genre by identifying a flaw and then fixing that flaw with a mechanic borrowed from another genre. This is also what happened with a much older game I designed called Fizzball. In Breakout or Arkanoid style games, each level becomes less fun as the number of remaining bricks decreases. That last brick is always a pain to hit. But in Fizzball, we happen to solve that problem by mashing up Breakout and Katamari Damacy. In Fizzball, your ball grows as the level progresses, making each level more fun as time goes on. But remember that Venn diagram overlap. If there's no overlap, you could be in trouble. And, as a side note, you can use the website Game Data Crunch to evaluate the overlap in audience between two games as a way of helping you estimate the Venn diagram overlap for the two genres you're intending to mash up. People usually only buy things when they are really interested in them. If they feel that a game sounds pretty cool, then they might wishlist it or think, I'll wait for a sale, and then they may never come back. What you want ideally is a game idea that gets people immediately excited enough to buy it. Mashups are naturally going to produce people who are super pumped, because if you have someone who is a fan of both genres in the mashup, they're going to say, this is the game for me at last, and then they'll buy it immediately. But conversely, if people hate either of the two genres, they won't buy. However, that's okay. The only thing that matters is how many people like your game enough to buy it. Someone who hates your game and someone who is ambivalent about your game are effectively the same. Neither of them will buy it. What matters is how many people you can excite. And mashups are great for generating a core of excited fans. The third and final way I'm aware of to generate hooky game ideas is to look for genre tropes that can be twisted. Examples of this would be things like Braid's reversal of time, or Max Payne's slowing of time, or even Superhot, where time only moves when you do. To generate these sorts of ideas, look at a viable genre and see which of its common tropes you can twist. Then see if that idea has both of the required halves of a hook. So you could come up with ideas like, what if entities in the game have timers on them? Like enemies getting bigger over time, or items getting weaker over time, or even a mech tactics game where you can scrub through time. Or audio changes, what if vital info comes to you via audio only? What if your in-game avatar is a piece of audio? Or all games have some kind of control, but what if instead of controlling the player, you're controlling the enemies, or the ground, or the world? This method can produce excellent ideas. I'm just not sharing my best ones since I intend to use them someday. But be wary. This type of idea usually has the surprising half of the hook, but they don't always have the market desirability half. But if you come up with enough ideas, and if you study and know what is desirable, you may eventually get lucky and produce an idea that is both surprising and desirable in this way. Okay, that about wraps it up for this video. We've learned about the components of hooks, the types of hooks, how to generate hooks, and how to use hooks to improve your chances of making profitable games. I've heard some people say that this method is not very artistic, and perhaps even a bit mercenary, but I disagree. This method certainly isn't for everyone, and it isn't the only way to make profitable games. But if you are creative enough to come up with game designs that fit these constraints, you'll be increasing your chances of success. You'll no longer have to roll a 20 on your D20 each time you make a game. And besides, constraints are not necessarily bad. Think of it like a poem. A sonnet may follow a rigid rhyming pattern, but do those constraints limit the expressiveness or potential of the poem? Certainly not. And the same goes for games. This is part of the method I've used to make numerous successful indie games since 2004. and I hope it will help you to succeed as well. More videos like this one are on the way, so please be sure to subscribe and follow us on Twitter, and we'll keep you up to date. Then check out our Clark Tank Twitch streams as well as our other videos here on YouTube. From all of us here at Brace Yourself Games, good luck, and see you on the next Clark Tank Deep Dive.